Did you ever wonder what it was truly like to live centuries ago, stripped of everything familiar? What if your entire existence was defined by rules set down 1,000 years before you were even born? Step back into the medieval world, around the 12th century, and uncover the astonishing realities that shaped a nun's daily life. Number 5. Absolute devotion to God. The medieval nun's existence revolved around a singular, overwhelming focus: absolute devotion to God. This was not a mere suggestion. It was the very bedrock of her being, shaping every single minute of her day and coloring every thought. Her life was a continuous act of worship, a constant offering of herself to the divine. From the moment she stirred in the pre-dawn darkness to the final moments of quiet contemplation before sleep, her every action was imbued with a spiritual purpose, a connection to the sacred breed. The sounds, the sights, the physical sensations of her day were all filtered through this lens of profound spiritual dedication. Historians point to prayer as the primary occupation, the central pillar around which all other activities orbited. It was not simply a chore. It was the breath of her soul, the pathway to spiritual union. The day began in the deepest hours of the night, with the first of the divine offices, known as Matins, long before the sun even hinted at rising, usually around 2 a.m. A bell would toll its resonant clang, echoing through the cold, silent dormitory. The nuns would rouse themselves from their simple communal beds, the chill air biting at their skin. There was no lingering, no pressing the snooze button on an invisible alarm. This was a summons, an immediate call to sacred duty. They would slip into their habits, their movements precise and practiced even in the dark, then proceed quietly, often in bare feet or simple sandals, to the church or chapel. The stone floors were frigid, and the only illumination came from a few flickering oil lamps or beeswax candles, casting long dancing shadows that stretched and swayed with every movement. The air was often heavy with the scent of old stone, incense, and damp wool. Once gathered in the choir stalls, arranged by seniority, the nuns would begin Matins, a service that could last for 2 or 3 hours. It involved the chanting of psalms, often dozens of them, reciting prayers, listening to readings from scripture, and sometimes hearing sermons. The chanting was a complex, beautiful tapestry of sound, rising and falling, filling the vast cold space. Each nun knew her part, her voice blending with those of her sisters, creating a unified expression of praise. It was a rigorous test of endurance, both physical and mental. Standing for such long periods in the cold, maintaining focus through hour after hour of recitation, required immense discipline. Records from various convents indicate that many nuns would sway with fatigue, their minds battling against the urge to drift, yet their spiritual resolve held firm. They believed that these prayers, offered in the silent hours of the night, were vital for the salvation of the world, for the well-being of the living and the dead. The weight of this responsibility rested heavily on their shoulders, urging them onward. Following a brief period of rest, often less than an hour, the nuns would gather again for Lauds, usually around sunrise, marking the arrival of the new day. This service focused on praise and thanksgiving, celebrating the light of dawn as a symbol of divine illumination. The sun would begin to stream through the stained glass windows, painting the stone floor with shifting colors, gradually warming the space. The sounds of birds beginning their daily chorus from outside the cloister walls would filter in, blending with the nuns' voices. Lauds was followed by Prime, the third office of the day, marking the first hour of daylight and dedicating the day's work to God. This service included a brief reading from the monastic rule, a reminder of the vows and the strict guidelines that governed their lives. Throughout the day, at regular intervals, the bells would ring again, summoning the nuns back to the church for the other canonical hours, Terce, Sext, and nun. Terce, around 9 a.m., often coincided with the mid-morning break from labor sext. At noon marked the middle of the day. Nun, around 3 p.m., symbolized the 9th hour, recalling the time of Christ's crucifixion. Each of these services, though shorter than Matins or Lauds, maintained the same structured pattern of psalmody, readings, and prayers. They served as constant spiritual anchors, punctuating the day's labor, ensuring that even amidst practical tasks, the focus remained on devotion. A nun might be in the middle of copying a manuscript or tending a garden, but the sound of the bell would immediately halt her activity, calling her back to her primary duty. Vespers, celebrated in the late afternoon or early evening as the sun began to set, marked the close of the working day. This service was often a solemn and beautiful affair, with candles being lit as darkness gathered outside. The chanting would take on a different tone, perhaps more reflective, as the nuns contemplated the end of the day and prepared for the quiet evening. Finally, Compline. The last service of the day was said just before bedtime. It was a service of profound spiritual preparation for sleep, a moment for introspection and confession. The nuns would examine their conscience, ask for forgiveness for any failings of the day, and commend themselves and their souls to God's care during the hours of darkness. After Compline, the great silence descended upon the convent, a period during which no unnecessary talking was permitted until after prime the next morning. This silence was not merely an absence of noise. It was an active part of their spiritual discipline, fostering contemplation and preventing idle chatter. Beyond the communal prayers of the divine office, personal prayer was equally vital. Each nun was expected to engage in spiritual reading, a practice known as Lectio Divina. This involved slowly and contemplatively reading scripture or other spiritual texts, not just to absorb information, but to allow the words to penetrate the heart and mind, leading to meditation and prayer. A nun might spend time in a quiet corner of the cloister, in the scriptorium, or even in her simple cell if she had one, poring over a small, precious manuscript. These personal moments of prayer were often opportunities for deep contemplation, for wrestling with spiritual questions, or simply resting in the presence of the divine. Some nuns also engaged in contemplative prayer, a form of prayer that moved beyond words, seeking a direct, non-conceptual experience of God. This often involved sitting in silence, opening oneself to divine grace, a profound and sometimes challenging spiritual journey. Fasting and acts of penance were integral components of a nun's absolute devotion. The medieval diet within a convent was already austere, often consisting of coarse bread, vegetables, beans, and sometimes cheese or eggs, with meat typically forbidden except for the infirm. However, during specific periods, like Lent or Advent, the fasting became even stricter. Meals might be reduced to one a day, with a complete abstinence from certain foods. These practices were not viewed as punishment, but as a means of spiritual discipline, of purifying the body and mind, and of identifying with the suffering of Christ. Scholars studying monastic rules note the detailed prescriptions for diet and fasting, reflecting the importance placed on bodily control as a pathway to spiritual liberation. Beyond dietary restrictions, nuns sometimes engaged in personal penances, such as wearing hair shirts, sleeping on hard surfaces, or enduring the cold without extra coverings. These were voluntary acts undertaken for personal spiritual growth, to atone for sins or to gain spiritual merit. Purpose was to mortify the flesh, to bring the body into submission to the spirit, thereby enabling a deeper connection with God. For many medieval nuns, devotion was not abstract. It was intensely personal, sometimes leading to profound mystical experiences. Accounts from the era described nuns who reported visions, felt divine presences, or experienced ecstatic states of spiritual union. These were often viewed as gifts from God, confirmations of their spiritual journey, and powerful inspirations for their devotion. A nun might recount seeing heavenly light, hearing celestial music, or even experiencing symbolic spiritual marriages with Christ. These experiences, whether metaphorical or literal, fueled their fervor and served as a powerful testament to the reality of their faith. Such experiences, while intensely personal, often solidified their commitment to the cloistered life and inspired their sisters. Convent, therefore, was not merely a place of structured prayer. It was also a crucible for intense spiritual transformation, a space where the divine was believed to intersect directly with human experience. The physical environment, with its somber architecture and consistent routine, was designed to support and facilitate this profound interior life. The stones of the chapel, worn smooth by centuries of kneeling, bore silent witness to countless acts of devotion, each nun contributing to a continuous course of prayer that stretched across generations. The very air within the cloister seemed to vibrate with the lingering echoes of chants and whispers, a testament to the unyielding commitment to their spiritual purpose. Number 4. Vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. The life of a medieval nun was radically defined by 3 solemn vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. These were not mere promises. They were absolute commitments, a complete renunciation of the secular world and a profound transformation of self. When a young woman entered the convent, she willingly stepped away from the expectations and freedoms of ordinary life, embracing a path of profound self-denial in pursuit of a higher spiritual calling. The ceremony of taking vows was a powerful, deeply symbolic event, signifying her death to the world and her rebirth into a new, consecrated existence. She would often prostrate herself before the altar, symbolically dying to her former life, sometimes even having a veil placed over her as if in a funeral. Her secular clothes would be removed, replaced by the simple uniform habit of the order, a visual representation of her new identity and her detachment from worldly vanity. The vow of poverty was a complete surrender of all personal possessions and wealth. A nun owned nothing. Anything she brought with her upon entering the convent, whether it was a dowry, personal belongings, or any inheritance, became the property of the community, the convent itself. This meant no personal jewelry, no fashionable clothes, no private stash of money. Her habit was simple, unadorned, and uniform for all sisters, made of coarse wool or linen often undyed. Her shoes were plain, practical. Even her sleeping arrangements were communal. In the dormitory, each nun typically had a very small, often curtained-off space, containing a simple bed, a straw mattress, a wool blanket, and perhaps a small chest for a few personal items like a prayer book or a rosary. There were no private rooms filled with cherished objects. Meals were eaten communally in the refectory, prepared from the convent's shared resources, and served simply. There was no special food for individuals, no rich dishes for celebrations that were not shared by all. This radical detachment from material goods extended to every aspect of daily life. If a nun needed a new habit, it was provided by the convent. If she needed a pen for the scriptorium, it came from the communal store. Even the books she read might belong to the convent library, not to her personally. This communal living was designed to foster a spirit of interdependence and equality, removing the distinctions that wealth and possessions create in the outside world. It also forced the nuns to rely completely on the community and, ultimately, on God's providence. The focus was not on accumulating earthly treasures, but on storing up spiritual riches. Scholars of monastic history note how this vow was intended to foster humility and to free the mind from anxieties about worldly security, allowing for deeper spiritual contemplation. This physical lack of personal property reinforced the idea that the nun's true home and true treasure were in the spiritual realm, not in the fleeting comforts of the material world. The vow of chastity was perhaps the most profound renunciation of worldly life, representing a complete dedication of the nun's body and soul to God alone. It meant foregoing marriage, family, and the natural desire for human companionship in a marital sense. The nun embraced a spiritual marriage to Christ, becoming his bride. This commitment went beyond mere celibacy. It involved the purity of thought and heart, a constant guarding of one's inner life against desires that would pull her away from her divine spouse. This vow meant no children, no grandchildren, no passing on a family name. Her lineage would be spiritual through her devotion and prayers. For women who often faced arranged marriages or limited choices in the secular world, entering a convent offered a different kind of agency, a choice to dedicate themselves entirely to a spiritual path, free from societal marital pressures. The physical enclosure of the cloister reinforced this vow. Nuns lived within strictly defined boundaries, with limited interaction with the outside world, particularly with men. Visitors were typically received in a special parlor, often separated by a grille, preventing physical contact. Letters were often read by the abbess to ensure their contents were appropriate and did not draw the nun back into worldly attachments. Even family visits were carefully regulated and frequent and rarely involved prolonged or intimate conversations. This physical separation was a practical means of protecting the vow, creating an environment where the temptations of the secular world were minimized, allowing the nun to focus on her spiritual union. Commitment to chastity was seen as a profound act of love and sacrifice, a mirroring of Christ's own self-giving, a testament to her complete surrender to the divine will. The vow of obedience was a total submission of the nun's individual will to the authority of her superiors and to the monastic rule. For most medieval nuns, this meant living under the rule of Saint Benedict, or a variation of it, which governed every aspect of daily life, from the precise timing of prayers to the nature of their work and even the manner of their speech. The abbess, as the spiritual mother of the community, held immense authority, and her word was to be obeyed without question or delay. This obedience was not a sign of weakness, but a spiritual discipline, a way of overcoming self-will and fostering humility. It was believed that true freedom lay not in doing whatever one wished, but in conforming one's will to the divine will, as mediated through the monastic rule and the abbess. This vow impacted every decision, big or small. A nun could not choose her work. She was assigned tasks by the abbess or the appropriate official, whether it was copying manuscripts, working in the garden, or caring for the sick. She could not choose her companions or friends. All interactions were communal. She could not leave the convent enclosure without explicit permission from the abbess, and then only for very specific necessary reasons, such as visiting another monastic house or attending to urgent convent business. Even personal study or spiritual practices were often guided by the abbess or novice mistress, ensuring they aligned with the community's spiritual goals. Collective good of the community, as defined by the rule and interpreted by the abbess, always superseded individual preferences. Accounts from various monastic communities show how deeply ingrained this principle was, shaping the very rhythm of daily life and fostering a deep sense of unity within the convent. The uniform dress, the shared meals, the communal dormitory, and the regulated schedule were all expressions of this profound commitment to obedience, creating a life where individual identity was subsumed into the larger identity of the spiritual community. Number 3. Community and sisterhood. While the individual nun's vows were deeply personal, her life was inextricably woven into the fabric of a tightly knit community, a sisterhood bound by shared purpose and common vows. Convent was not merely a collection of women, it was a self-contained world, a spiritual family where every individual played a role in the collective pursuit of God. The physical layout of the cloister itself reinforced this communal living, creating an intimate space where shared experiences were paramount. The cloister, usually a square or rectangular courtyard bordered by covered walkways, formed the heart of the convent. It was a serene, enclosed space for meditation, quiet walks, and limited conversation. From the cloister doors led to all the essential communal areas, the church or chapel, the refectory for meals, the dormitory for sleeping, the chapter house for meetings, and the scriptorium for scholarly work. Life was almost entirely communal. Nuns typically slept together in a large, unheated dormitory, often arranged in rows of simple beds separated by curtains or low partitions. This shared sleeping space meant little to no privacy, fostering a sense of collective vulnerability and mutual support. The early morning chill, the stirring of sisters in the dark, the quiet sounds of preparation for Matins, all were shared experiences. Meals were taken together in the refectory, a large dining hall, in silence while one of the sisters read aloud from a spiritual book or the lives of saints. The food was simple, and each sister received the same portion, reinforcing equality and shared austerity. This communal eating was not just about sustenance. It was a ritual, a time for spiritual nourishment alongside physical. Even tasks like laundry, cooking, or gardening were often performed in groups, fostering cooperation and shared responsibility. The structure of the convent was hierarchical, yet designed to support the entire community. At the head was the abbess, the spiritual mother and temporal administrator of the convent. She was usually elected by the nuns themselves, often for life, and held significant authority, managing the convent's finances, overseeing its daily operations, and guiding the spiritual lives of her sisters. Her decisions were final, and her wisdom was sought on all matters. Assisting the abbess were various officials, each with specific duties crucial to the smooth functioning of the community. Prioress was often second in command, stepping in for the abbess when needed, and overseeing aspects of daily discipline. The novice mistress was responsible for training new recruits, guiding them through the demanding period of probation before they took their final vows. She taught them the rule, the customs of the house, and the spiritual disciplines. Other roles included the sacristan, who was in charge of the church, its vestments, liturgical books, and sacred vessels, ensuring everything was ready for services. The cellarer managed the convent's supplies, provisions, and finances, overseeing the acquisition of food, drink, and other necessities. The infirmarian cared for the sick and elderly sisters, administering herbal remedies and providing comfort. The chantress led the choir during the divine office, ensuring the complex chants were performed correctly. Portress guarded the entrance to the cloister, controlling who entered and exited, ensuring the enclosure was maintained. Each of these roles, and many others, contributed to the self-sufficiency and orderly life of the convent, truding the intricate web of interdependence that characterized the sisterhood. Within this structured environment, daily interactions between sisters were constant. They prayed together, worked together, ate together, and even spent their limited recreation time together. While the rule often prescribed silence for much of the day, particularly during work and meals, there were designated times for conversation, often in the chapter house or during limited recreation periods. These were opportunities for sisters to share spiritual insights, discuss community matters, or simply engage in edifying conversation. These interactions, while often formal and purpose-driven, built bonds of affection, support, and mutual understanding. A sister might turn to another for help with a difficult task in the scriptorium, for comfort during an illness, or for spiritual guidance when facing a personal struggle. Of course, living in such close quarters with so little personal space could also present challenges. Personalities might clash, minor irritations could fester, and individual struggles might impact the communal harmony. The rule of Saint Benedict, widely adopted by many convents, contained detailed provisions for addressing conflicts, promoting humility, and fostering charity among sisters. Confession of faults both to the abbess and sometimes to one another was a common practice, designed to clear the air and restore harmony. The emphasis was always on forgiveness, understanding, and upholding the peace of the community. The strength of the sisterhood lay in its shared commitment to a spiritual ideal which transcended individual differences. Convent provided a profound sense of belonging, a spiritual family that replaced the one a nun had left behind. This shared purpose and mutual support allowed them to endure the rigors of monastic life, knowing they were part of something larger than themselves, a collective striving for spiritual perfection that defined their very existence. Communal life of the convent was a living testament to the belief that the path to God was best walked, not alone, but in the unwavering companionship of devoted sisters. The echoes of their shared prayers and the rhythm of their communal life formed an unbreakable bond, a tangible manifestation of their enduring sisterhood. Number 2. Importance of manual labor and self-sufficiency. For a medieval nun, labor was not just a means to an end. It was an integral part of her spiritual life, a form of active prayer. The Benedictine motto, Ora et labora, pray and work, perfectly encapsulated this core belief. It was believed that physical work performed with diligence and humility was a powerful way to glorify God, to keep the mind and body occupied, and to prevent idleness, which was seen as an open door to temptation. Every task, no matter how mundane, was elevated to a sacred act when performed with a spiritual intention. This understanding of work transformed daily chores into opportunities for devotion and contemplation, binding the physical and spiritual realms bog. The scope of manual labor within a medieval convent was vast and varied, reflecting the institution's need to be largely self-sufficient. Convents were complex economic units, often holding significant land and requiring diverse skills to sustain their community. A significant portion of the nun's day, when not engaged in prayer, was dedicated to practical tasks that kept the convent running. This comprehensive range of work ensured that the community could provide for its own needs, from food and clothing to housing and spiritual sustenance. The sounds of work, from the rustling of fabric to the scraping of tools, mingled with the quiet hum of prayer throughout the day. Agricultural labor, though less common for nuns directly working in fields than for monks, was still a vital part of many convents' economic life. Nuns would often oversee the management of their convent's estates, which could include fields, vineyards, and pastures. While lay brothers or hired laborers might perform the heaviest outdoor work, nuns were actively involved in tasks within the cloister gardens. They cultivated herbs for medicinal purposes and culinary use, tended to vegetable patches that supplied the refectory, and sometimes managed small orchards for fruit. The rhythm of the seasons dictated much of this work. From planting in spring to harvesting in late summer and autumn, cultivation of these gardens was not just about providing food. It was also a metaphor for spiritual growth, tending to the soul's inner garden. Accounts from various convents describe nuns diligently harvesting produce, preserving fruits and vegetables for winter, and managing the careful balance of their agricultural resources. The smell of rich earth and growing plants would have been a familiar presence, particularly in the warmer months. Crafts and textile production were another major area of labor. Spinning wool and flax, weaving cloth, and sewing garments were constant activities. The nuns needed to make and mend their own habits, undergarments, and bed linens. This work was often performed in communal workrooms, where the rhythmic hum of spinning wheels and the clack of looms filled the air. Many convents were renowned for their exquisite embroidery, especially for ecclesiastical vestments, altar cloths, and banners used in the church. These intricate works of art, often adorned with gold thread and precious gems, required immense skill, patience, and artistic talent. Such pieces were not merely decorative. They were offerings of beauty to God, enhancing the sacred spaces. Sometimes, these high-quality textiles were also sold to the outside world, generating crucial income for the convent. The feel of rough wool, the smooth glide of silk, and the prick of a needle were all part of this daily reality. Within the convent's buildings, numerous household tasks demanded constant attention. Cooking for the entire community in the refectory kitchen was a continuous chore involving the preparation of simple but nourishing meals from scratch. Cleaning the extensive monastic buildings, the church, dormitory, refectory, chapter house, and cloisters was an endless task, ensuring order and cleanliness which were seen as reflections of spiritual discipline. Laundry, performed by hand, was physically demanding, often involving large amounts of water and soap. Maintenance of the buildings, though perhaps handled by lay servants or hired craftsmen for major repairs, often involved nuns performing smaller daily upkeep. Every corner of the convent, from the polished stone floors to the gleaming altar, bore witness to the diligent labor of the sisters. Beyond the internal needs of the convent, many nuns also engaged in various forms of caregiving. The infirmarian, assisted by other sisters, would tend to the sick, the elderly, and the infirm within the community. This involved administering herbal remedies, preparing special diets, and providing comfort and spiritual support. In some convents, particularly those that ran hospices or hospitals, nuns extended their care to the poor and sick from outside the convent walls, embodying Christian charity. This hands-on care was a direct application of their devotion, seeing Christ in those they serve. They might also be involved in preparing the dead for burial, a somber but sacred duty. The economic role of the convent was significant. While vows of poverty meant individual nuns owned nothing, the convent itself often owned substantial lands, properties, and resources, usually acquired through noble endowments or gifts. The nuns, particularly the abbess and the cellarer, were responsible for managing these assets, collecting rents, overseeing agricultural production, and budgeting for the community's needs. This involved practical business skills, record keeping, and the ability to negotiate with local lords, merchants, and farmers. Some convents also brewed ale or wine, produced cheese, or engaged in other small-scale industries to generate income, making them vital contributors to the local economy. The ability to manage these resources ensured the long-term survival and stability of the convent, allowing the nuns to continue their spiritual mission without relying entirely on external charity. Manual labor, therefore, was not merely a means of subsistence. It was a profound act of spiritual dedication, self-reliance, and communal responsibility, ensuring the viability of their cloistered lives and reinforcing their core belief in the dignity and spiritual merit of honest work. The rhythm of their daily tasks, from the repetitive actions of spinning to the careful movements of a gardener, mirrored the ceaseless flow of their prayers intertwining the earthly and the divine. Number 1. Pursuit of knowledge and preservation of culture. While medieval convents are often associated with prayer and manual labor, they were also vital centers for the pursuit of knowledge and the preservation of culture. In a world where literacy was rare and books were precious commodities, convents stood as beacons of learning, intellectual activity, and artistic creation. For many nuns, the intellectual life was a profound form of spiritual devotion, an avenue for understanding the divine through study and scholarship. The meticulous work of copying ancient texts, the careful study of scripture, and the creation of illuminated manuscripts were all seen as acts of prayer, offering knowledge and beauty back to God. At the heart of the intellectual life of many convents was the scriptorium, a dedicated room where nuns painstakingly copied manuscripts. This was a slow, labor-intensive process, demanding immense patience, precision, and skill. Nuns would sit at desks, often hunched over for hours, transcribing texts by hand, using quill pens and ink made from natural pigments. They copied not only liturgical books, missals, psalters, antiphonals, but also theological treatises, classical texts, medical texts, and historical chronicles. The scriptorium was often a silent space, broken only by the scratching of pens and the turning of pages, reflecting the intense concentration required. Each letter, each word was rendered with utmost care, as if the very act of writing was a meditation. The feel of parchment or vellum, the smell of ink, and the steady rhythm of their work were familiar companions. Beyond mere transcription, many nuns were also involved in the art of illumination. This involved adorning manuscripts with intricate decorative borders, elaborate initial letters, historiated initials, and miniature paintings. These illuminations transformed a simple text into a vibrant work of art. Nuns ground pigments from minerals and plants, mixed them with binders like egg yolk, and applied them with fine brushes. Gold leaf, painstakingly applied, would shimmer on the pages, catching the light and adding an element of divine brilliance. These elaborate works were not just about aesthetics. They were visual aids for devotion, stories told in pictures that could instruct and inspire even the illiterate. Scholars studying medieval art note the incredible skill and artistry displayed by nuns in creating these masterpieces, which have survived centuries as testaments to their dedication and talent. The beauty of these books was believed to reflect the beauty of God, and the act of creating them was an offering. Education within the convent was extensive and rigorous. Nuns needed to be literate in Latin, the language of the church and scholarship, in order to participate in the divine office, read scripture, and study theological texts. They learned to read, write, and understand complex theological concepts. Music was another crucial part of their education, as they learned to sing the intricate chants of the divine office, often with incredible precision and beauty. Beyond theology and music, some convents also educated their nuns in rudimentary medicine, particularly herbalism, which was essential for caring for the sick within the infirmary. They learned about different herbs, their properties, and how to prepare remedies. This practical knowledge was crucial for the self-sufficiency of the convent. Some convents also offered education to young women from aristocratic families, who might reside in the convent for a period before marriage or before choosing to take vows. These young women learned literacy, basic arithmetic, domestic skills, and often music and embroidery, making convents important educational institutions for women in an era when formal schooling was rare. Nuns were not just passive recipients or copiers of knowledge. Some were active scholars and authors themselves. While records are sparse, accounts from the medieval period speak of abbesses and individual nuns who composed treatises on theology, wrote spiritual guidance, compiled historical chronicles, or even composed hymns and musical pieces. Their writings often provide unique insights into medieval spirituality, daily monastic life, and the intellectual landscape of the time. These women, through their scholarship, contributed to the ongoing intellectual discourse of the Church and often corresponded with leading scholars and religious figures of their day. Convent provided a unique space where women could pursue intellectual interests and contribute to the broader world of knowledge, a privilege often denied to women in secular society. The role of convents as preservers of books and knowledge cannot be overstated. In an age before printing presses, every book was a handwritten pocket, immensely valuable and fragile. Convents accumulated libraries of manuscripts, protecting ancient texts from loss and decay. Through their copying efforts, they ensured the survival of countless works, both religious and secular, that might otherwise have been lost to history. They were living archives, repositories of learning where the accumulated wisdom of centuries was carefully guarded and propagated. Quiet rustle of parchment and the faint scent of old ink were ever present in their libraries. The pursuit of knowledge, therefore, was not a mere academic exercise. It was a sacred trust, a mission to safeguard and transmit the intellectual and spiritual heritage of their civilization. It allowed nuns to delve deeper into the mysteries of faith, to understand the intricacies of Scripture, and to contemplate the nature of God, cementing their role as indispensable custodians of medieval learning and culture, shaping not only their own spiritual lives, but also the intellectual landscape of their entire era.